Okay, hello and welcome back to Modern Apps SRE Live. We're continuing on with part two of our series on using GitOps and GitHub actions with some Bash to create the Twitter automation service that can do some interesting things. Like we'll look at how we can automatically create tweets based on events that are happening on the site. And also create a service where different members that are working on a common project, when they do something, they work on an update that's relevant for the community, they can go and have a process which they can use the community Twitter feed, but we still have some controls in place just to make sure, depending, allow us to uh, to feel comfortable, make sure no accidents are going to happen. Okay, so we in the previous video we talked about some planning, and now we're going to do some implementation. And so the only thing I really did for prep for this so far is I was looking at this tweet.sh, and yeah, pulled it down, set it up for my local Bash client on my local developer workstation here, and it was super easy. And so now we are going to um, go ahead and set it up on uh, uh, on our GitHub action. So let's get to it. So let's start by going over and looking. Actually, let me go ahead and I'm going to go into my developer workstation here. Do most of my work in this Ubuntu workstation, virtual machine that I have running, and use Visual Studio Code. Well, there's a mistake that I'm gonna have to edit out. um, yeah, I didn't mean to show my keys. Of course, it's one of the downsides about opening an application that wasn't already open before you got on the stream. And I'm doing this, right? Learn about some of these things you need to think about when live streaming, because I'm glad that there's nobody watching this, and I actually have it set to private. So by the time anyone sees this, yeah, nobody actually, yeah, it's set to private, so nobody will see that, fortunately. But yeah, just for those, keep in mind, if you ever do live streaming recording, that's particularly live streaming. I just opened up Visual Studio Code here, and it left my client key file with my keys open. And so, if this, if I had people watching right now, then that would have not been good. So fortunately, I did not. So word lesson for the wiser. So yeah, so what we need to do first here is I've gone ahead here. I've set up the instructions for that tweet.sh are have this tweet client key file here in the directory, and you can see I ran it. So you can see here how basic the syntax is all you need to do is have either that file there or to have those environmental variables present per the directions that we were just looking at, to make sure that there were those environmental variables that have the values for all of the keys that you need to post to the Twitter API. So, and then once you have that, this is dot, and of course I could, add this to the local bin directory that's within the search, and so I could just change it to where I have it as a regular command for the time being on my local workstation. I'm not planning to use it a lot on my local workstation, so I'm not going to worry about that. And at the end of the day, it's not making a big difference for the automation workflow. So I'll probably just leave the syntax like this, and go from there. But that's what we'll be setting up on in the workflow. But first, let's go ahead and let's look at the first thing we want to do is set up a manual dispatch action to to test this one. So let's see. I have a manual dispatch action here. So I could go straight to the docs, and I've got great boilerplate text, boilerplate templates there in the docs for GitHub Actions. So if you want to do manually initiated workflow, you just look up those triggers, and they've got the reference right there. But I already have some workflows already built out that may have some other useful information in here. And manual dispatch is going to be a course repository template. And and I should actually zoom into the screen a little bit. This is very small. I wonder, can I? No. But, okay, so where's my view? View. How do I zoom in VS Code? I'm not especially good at any particular editor because I always jump around between tools and I rarely stay with the tool long enough to trick it out as well as I should. But I think I'm on that path of VS Code. But I'm actually just going to do this here. It's my settings, and we'll go ahead and move that up to 150 here. So should make everything a little bit better. Yeah, that should be better. So let's go ahead and come on, back to life. Okay, so not huge, but hopefully that is better for visibility. And so, yeah, so I have already, just in my local development environment here, I already have various different courses already forked and cloned down that that I can start working from. And so, first thing here, I have this course repository template. Now, before I really work with it from it, I want to I want to check just to make sure this has what I want in it, and then I'm going to make sure that it is fully synced up before I start working with the files here. Do, 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 do. Okay, and the one I want is create new course. And this is a workflow that we use. And so whenever I create a new course, there's a very simple, nice workflow here um, that really makes it very easy. It just takes a couple inputs, course title, course navbar title, short title, um, and two characters and a description. So basically, like it sounds like, why do we need all these titles? Well, you need a full length title, right? And you want a short title, so when you look in the navigation bar, but you want to be totally human readable, naturally formatted. Like, and if you've got a side navigation bar, you don't want it to be like camel case over there or something for developers only. But it obviously can't take as much space as you may want to have available in a full title. So you need a short, human readable title. That's the navbar title. And then you also we give you the option to customize what ends up in your URL. So the URL can be nice and not be some random auto-generated character. But in your URL, we're going to want that to be, all lowercase. In any case, the point being is not what these fields are. Got a little off track there, but it is that it's real simple syntax here to allow someone to manually initiate a workflow and to stub out a couple basic fields that you can have. And from GitHub, that presents a very, very simple, small, little user input form. There's nothing fancy. This is not meant to be like a really fancy input form. We're going to do a bunch of input masking and visual form design, and it's going to look beautiful. It's very simple, but it's very clean, very crisp, elegant, if you will. But it is not something that is meant for random end users. It's meant for people who are technical resources supporting your projects. Now let's see. So we have our workflow dispatch scaffolding here. And then we go into jobs. A lot of the stuff is relative to this workflow exclusively, but there's I always find when I'm repeating action workflows, there's also always things that aren't just boilerplate, but also things that I do related to stuff I built out specifically for modern apps that I end up needing to reuse. So I'll start with this, making a copy of this as a boilerplate template. Scrubbing it out. Eventually, if I end up with doing a lot more of these, nice to actually make one that is a actual template. But I don't do this frequently enough to where, it makes sense for me to go to the trouble of templating at this point in time. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this as a template. We'll go ahead and I'll just do it right on this repository. That's the one thing with the manual dispatch is it isn't involve a pull request. Now you might have your workflow do any number of things, right? But it's a very straightforward process from like, I can test something here without actually impacting any of my code or anything else on GitHub. I just create a manual dispatch, and it happens to, that particular GitHub action file happens to exist in the repository as my other production code. But the only thing that it does is leverage the GitHub's own workflow service, and it doesn't do anything else with my code base. And so, at least for myself, I feel comfortable in this context, going ahead and setting up a manual dispatch workflow for a repository. Now, just the cautious person in me says, hey, I could do this on any old repository. I might as well do it on a repository that maybe is on my private of what have you. And granted, this is a fork, so I don't have to push this all the way back up to the main. I can keep this on the fork, so I'll do that just for good practice. But yeah, nonetheless, this should be using manual dispatch for testing things shouldn't pose a risk to the other things that exist in that repository, unless you do something stupid in your actual script files themselves. Okay, so let's see. So we're going to go ahead and copy this. Okay, so we've got create new course copy. And what are we going to call this? So we'll call this I'll just call this manual tweet. I need to get better at consistent syntax, but sometimes I use, camel case. Sometimes I use different modified camel case. Sometimes I use underscores and dashes. And the sad thing is like, as much as some of that is from being sloppy, a fair amount of it is because carrying the same data between very similar fields across different services, oftentimes imposes different restrictions. Like there's some things where you wouldn't expect, oh, a dash is fine, but an underscore is not, or you're forced to use a particular case. And so it's really hard to keep 100% consistent data formats when you're using a stack that integrates or I don't even think it's just a stack, right? I think if your viewpoint of what you're working on crosses enough layers, right? There's never been like one stack that crosses all the layers. That's not a thing, right? Because there's only so much view that one person can have. But nonetheless, so let's go. We've got our manual tweet. Let's call this manual tweet. Manual tweet. Okay. And what fields do you want on manual tweet? So I'm trying to think for the tweet. Let's go out and look at our Twitter thing again because I'm thinking like, what metadata do we possibly need to have here? What we want to have? We don't need to have it necessarily for even this initial little trial here, but even by the time I get my first actual implementation done, which I'm going to do very quickly, um, yeah, I want to have some clarity on what I want to do for. Do I need to gather any metadata for this, or can I really? There's always the goal to make it as simple as possible. And if I'm not going to get meaning out of the metadata, I don't want to go out of the way of gathering, metadata. Or if I do, I want to make sure it's as smart of a metadata as I can. So I'm going to go ahead and look at this tweet, right? And so the interesting thing is like if you look at a typical tweet, what might we potentially want to gather metadata about, right? So we have the question about some sort of metrics gathering and reporting, potentially, right? And then of course, another, the big one we want to look out for first is in order for me to use this client, this methodology to send a tweet, I have to have the user input the tweet in a particular format. right? And I have to make sure that as that tweet that they input passes through the different elements of the workflow automation, that the syntax remains what it needs to be, right? If a quotation mark or a special character gets out of place and isn't preserved properly as it passes through these different layers, then I lose my, my ability to do, to tweet, right? So, I think and this is one of the areas where there are differences between your testing something on your local bash client and doing something in GitHub Actions. Right? And also how you do something in GitHub Actions, that kind of weighs an important point, because there's different ways that you can gather input data, and how you gather input data, like, it can really matter on how well it is to pass through. And case in point being that when with Modern Apps Learning, people register through the community through an issue ticket. And I have an issue ticket template that is essentially in YAML format that that so that way when a user opens the issue ticket, so that way they can submit a request to register for the community, what they see is YAML, right? How they enter the data is YAML. But a GitHub issue ticket does not respect YAML. It's passing it through, right? Without any intelligence of it, or any respect for its conventions in particular. Like, it'll pass through the YAML no problem, with one glowing exception, that one of the biggest reasons to use YAML, one of the biggest advantages of using YAML, is that you can just put a little hashtag there, and you can comment, and you can comment on a lot of things, save JSON. Right? And that's one of the biggest advantages of YAML over JSON, is that I can comment. And even in the issue ticket I have right now, I have the instructions separated from the fields, because I have to figure out, I'm sure there's a way to do it, but I have to figure out the syntax that will allow me to pass through the hashtag values properly. So that way when, because GitHub Action first receives it, it thinks it's a markdown document, right? And it saves it in a shell environment. And in my shell environment, I can say, hey, that's not markdown. That, and fortunately, Markdown doesn't have any markup in it, in any, hidden metadata layers that pollute that. It's a text document, right, essentially. And so if I pass through YAML formatting in that, through that process, then it comes through pretty well preserved. But again, not the hashtags. And so it already has a negative user experience impact that I can't currently put my instruction in line with my fields, because I have a lot of new users using that. I'm not using data validation, because I want to teach people that in the world of GitOps, you got to be careful. If you're if you're someone who works on the DevOps projects, no one's going to write input validation for you. You're the one. You're part of the team that's responsible for doing stuff like that for end users. Right? So yeah, you've got to be learn to be careful, but at the same time, it would be really easy to be able to pass those things through. And so there's all these things, like now fortunately, it's you have a little more finite control in manual dispatch of being able to receive a specific string as the string it was intended to be. Because they do a very good job of making sure that they provide a standard web input field that allows you to enter the variables. Why do I have Twitter up still? Let me go back into where did I have that action? Yeah, so let's just look at what this form looks like. I've been talking about what the form looks like. Let's go to our course repository template, and let's look at the course creation form and see what it looks like, so we're not just speaking to there. So if I go in here into actions, and I say course, create new course. Yeah, that's the one. Now you'll see that since this one is a if we go back into the code file for this, like we saw over in Visual Studio Code a minute ago, it has a type of as manual dispatch. And so for every manual dispatch, they all have this thing here where you'll get this nice little pull down. And you don't necessarily need to have input variables. It's perfectly fine. You may have lots of workflows that don't necessarily have an input variable, so you don't have to have fields. It may just be a trigger that says run workflow, or you could have as many as many input fields as you want, but this isn't going to do any fancy form stuff, right? There's definitely some controls you can put in place if you're looking to GitHub Actions documentation. But I don't think, at the end of the day, if you really want to put effort into a form, this isn't the place to do it. Right? If you're really going to put effort into a form, you want to use an external tool. You can also, every single GitHub action can also be what's called a request dispatch, which allows you to accept the same exact inputs as through a REST call, or through other means, right? I very frequently scrub this data from files. I have people post files that it may be JSON or YAML. I'll scrub the data from the file and use that to gather my metadata for the workflow run. And so that gives you an idea of what our capabilities are here. If you're just taking in some fairly standard string type data, then I think there's are there very basic field types. I think this is a great way of being able to handle it given some other constraints. But again, one thing you don't have when you're using this is you don't have the full GitOps workflow. This is not going to go to a pull request. The way this works is if I have enough, if I'm have write permissions on this repository, I can run it, period. Right? And you got to be really careful with that, right? Because there's all types of secrets. All types of secrets. Now the user who runs these don't see the secrets. Right? It doesn't expose the secret in the diagnostics. However, right, like you may have privileged workflows in here, and you just have to make sure you think about that, and you decide if you want to use manual dispatch as your mechanism. Once anybody with right level privileges, can run these, and there's not much. Now I could actually, as a first step, and I do have this in some other workflows, I could have a manual dispatch and have the first step in my GitHub Action workflow to be check, hey, who ran this, and are they in GitHub Team X? Or I could, I could use any type of call I wanted to make in my GitHub Action to say, do I think this person has whatever criteria that, based on their GitHub username of the person who clicked the run workflow button, do I think that they have enough privileges, does that person with that ID, I can connect that to any source I can potentially connect it to say, do I want to give them permission to run this? But, and so there may be cases where that's useful. But in general, I do much prefer the GitOps workflow. And I have a number of automations that automate their way, where participants still do the pull request process. And through those event triggers, I still handle the processing in an automated way. So it's still an automation, but it allows for more different handling hooks. So you at least, whether you want to do it right now or not, it's still a much, I think, better way. And then if you decide you want to do something where you incorporate a manual approval, in that process, you already have an architecture that's capable of supporting it. So I think, these manual dispatches, they're good for testing. Not necessarily great for heavy utilization otherwise. So, okay, so now we've seen what that is. Let's go back into our so we've got manual tweet, and I think for this, I just want to have one input for right now, and I'm going to say tweet. Because the thing of it is there's metadata that, out of all the metadata that you can gather, some of it you don't have to bug users for, right? Tweet. I'll just call this tweet. And we'll put some input logic. So I'm gonna figure out exactly what I want to do in terms of appending. But like I don't want to I want to kind of set a standard here where tweets that people share are up to a certain length, because I want to I as a regular thing where I do automations, I want to put in hashtags. That being said, for our manual service, I think if we do have a service, well, this one's for testing, but if we also create a service that allows community members to post a tweet that is a user directed tweet, maybe we'll give them all 140 characters. But in terms of the tweets that we're going to automate based on an event that happened, I want to restrict those down to like 110 characters, depending, I'll figure out, what hashtags, and I want to create like a standard. So um, I might, depending on what happens, I might want to append a different hashtag or notify a different Twitter user in the message. Um, but I don't want to have to sit there and optimize that to like exact perfection for every single tweet. I want to make a standard that says either 100, 110 characters we'll make as the cutoff for those type of tweets. And we'll reserve 30 to 40 characters for hashtags and other things that we may append to the end to help enhance the promotion. The main reason why we're doing this anyways. And so let's see. So let's go ahead and so we'll just go ahead and we'll create tweet. And now we've got to go ahead in here and we'll go ahead, we'll say our first job, we'll give it a name. We'll call this, we're not going to do, now in this case, we're just a test. So we're not going to do any type of pre-scrubbing or anything like this. We're just going to make it real basic and we're going to do the minimum needed to test this out. Okay, so we'll call this, I'll just call this, I still am like figuring out like an optimal naming convention for how I want to name GitHub Actions. I am not, super guru at GitHub Actions. I use them a lot, but I'm not like someone who focuses on them especially. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete this scaffolding that I wrote for the other one. And let's go ahead. Oops, I deleted more than I want to there. So I see what I did, or actually I deleted less than I wanted to. So we're going to say our job runs on Ubuntu. That's good. First step here, I show this payload file, which has all the metadata that Git provides about the event. So this is useful both when you're developing and when you're troubleshooting. I just make this a standard thing for all my action workflows, so that way, I can always go in to find out what metadata existed in that particular event in the case I need to troubleshoot or build. Let's see, let me initialize Git. I don't know that I need to do that. Let's see. Am I going to be doing any Git pushing? That's an interesting question. This client, I'm sure, must leverage my local some. I mean, it does API calls. So that's an interesting because I did do, like I said, light testing on tweet.sh, and I don't remember the instructions saying that it had a dependency on on your local GitHub profile. I think the only thing it uses, yeah, because actually that's true. This is not using my credentials as I normally use as a normal Git user. This is using the developer credentials, and so that was one thing we talked about earlier, but I didn't actually really go through at all. Is here in Twitter, before you can automate anything to the Twitter API or test or if you want to make any type of posts and requests to the Twitter API, you do need to have a Twitter developer account. It is free, but you do need to request it. They do need to approve it. I'm trying to remember, like, I think it doesn't, I don't think it takes that long usually, but I think it's a manual process. And so I do think it could take up to even a couple days. I had a little hassle when I had mine. It was my fault. I used I had a bad email address. I used a Google Groups email address that I didn't realize I can't send, at least I couldn't figure out how to send an email from a Google Groups address. You can receive them, but when you send them, they come from your actual source account. So it screwed everything up and I ended up taking like a month and a half to get my Twitter developer account. So nonetheless, I've got it now. But just word to the wise, before you start down this path, make sure you go through and go to developer.twitter.com, and you'll see in there instructions for requesting the account, and it should be, pretty quick. I think sometimes it happens within a day, but don't necessarily count on it. Okay, so when you're in here, you have you all your credentials are associated with an app. Right. And so an app's just a name you associate with it. It may be, it's kind of indicative of like maybe you're creating an access token because you're creating some application that uses that access token. And in general, it's a good practice to not share those between if you end up making 5 different applications that kind of, you want to scope those. And give them each their own tokens. And so in the event there is a problem, you at least know where it comes from. And hopefully you can filter them down to the minimum permission needed for each of the different application needs. So in this case, I have this project. I call it Modern Apps by Tanzu here, and so you can see here, you can just set up. There's not really much in terms of setup. And you can go over here and you can see here that I have an option for an API key and an API secret. And notice these are called consumer keys. Right. And then you also have a bearer token, this access token, and this access token secret. And so when you use the API, this twitter.sh, the shell script we're going to use, it doesn't require the bearer token, but you do need the API key and secret, and the access token and secret. Now, I actually keep once you generate these, it shows you them one time, like is often the case with any type of cryptographic secrets. So when you first generate them, you've got it, and you want to keep them in a secure place that's adequately secure. At the same time, um, that you have some, you're not getting, the big downside is you have to regenerate these. If you have applications that are built using these tokens, you'll have to revisit any applications that are using these tokens if you regenerate them, and they'll just break immediately and stop working once you regenerate them. So it's always nice to not have to regenerate them. I personally, the best practice is save them in as few places as you need. If it's and limit the scope as much as possible. If you're going to do everything through GitHub Actions, then do everything. Then just exclusively using GitHub secrets is great, right? But you also have to consider, ooh, what if am I ever going to use anything other than GitHub Actions? Where not to say I would not use GitHub Actions, but would I use other things that I might potentially need to pass secrets for, and or might there be a time that I need a secure solution that allows me to retrieve my secret, which I don't believe is possible through GitHub Actions. And so I do put these in GitHub Secrets. I also use Azure Key Vault. Because I don't have any preference in terms of cloud service providers. Overall, I use all the big ones. But in terms of the Key Vault services, I did a little evaluation of each of them, and that's one particular thing. I like the way that Azure implemented it, where they've got everything from secrets to different types of certificate handling and other things like that, all in one kind of commonly integrated service that also has a common API, and that kind of matters. There's a lot, some of the other services that are out there kind of do, some are just optimized for certain types of certificates only. Anyways, so I do like that Azure Key Vault service. So now let's get back. So we can see those keys. I saw we plugged them in earlier. Now I'm going to get back to my workstation here, and let's go ahead and see. So we may not need hardly any of these. And of course, my workstation is not responding. That's of course why you're live streaming, but at the same time, it's probably why having open broadcasting running, workstation running, multiple. Oh yeah, my CPU looks like it's running quite high right now. So, well, I think this is going to be a good segue for me to pause right here for the day, as I have some family visiting. So I'm going to call it a night right now. I'll pick this up again tomorrow to finish the rest. It was a bit long-winded in this one. Fortunately, nobody's on the live stream, so if you happen to watch this before I get to edit it, sorry for that. But yeah, I'll pick it up and do a little bit of editing as well to make it a little bit more streamlined for people who watch it on demand. And yeah, it's been good overall test of I think the live streaming. I think even though there were parts I would like to edit and refine more. My main goal with live streaming isn't to get the live streaming audience. Like if that happens, hey, that'll be cool. Right? But my main thing is when you do a webinar, you can have a great recording on the first take. Boom, it's good enough if that's the type of content you're going for. And that's exactly usually the type of content I'm going for, a little bit casual. Um, but still succinct. And my hope is that by doing live streaming like this, when I record a video, even if the main use of the video is on demand, that I'll get that kind of psychological benefit that you're getting when you have a webinar that for whatever reason goes away when you know that you can stop and edit and record easily and nobody's watching. I find that when I know that I can edit as much as I want, that I have a much harder time getting clean takes, and I can spend a much longer time to actually get a recorded video out. And so yeah, so with this method, doesn't the only thing I kind of like as opposed to the webinar is it does still leave some room for being able to edit. It's kind of a nice thing, and yeah, and then I can also have that dual benefit of offering a pure real-time experience if for anyone who wants to tune in live, but then also still do some editing and cut through some of the pauses a little bit for the on-demand video to make it a little more succinct. So thanks everybody for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.